Thank you so much for coming. We were supposed to get started at 8:30, but we wanted to make sure that those that wanted to see the building had an opportunity to do that. So today is our first community meeting around phase 2 of our outreach. So many of you know, I'm sure, if you're here, you heard about our phase 1 announcement. And the first thing I want to say is these people up here are our family engagement team, and they're amazing. They did a great job trying to make sure that we hear from as many families as possible. I've seen them, I say this a lot, I've seen them at my son's basketball game in the summer, just connecting with parents. I've seen them at fiestas patronales, at every event that we had. Our family engagement team was there trying to make sure that we get information out to as many families as possible so that they can provide input. So today's agenda is we'll give a brief background around how we got here. We'll talk about phase 1 outreach that we did and the decisions that we came up with in phase 1. We'll show folks the 2 potential maps that we're looking at in phase 2, and we'll have some breakout discussion. Unlike the first meeting that we had, we actually now have an interactive map where you could literally scroll in and type your address in, and you'll see in both of these maps where your child would be attending both elementary and middle school. So really happy to have that feature, because I know in my experience, a lot of people are approaching this from a very personal perspective, like, what about me? What about my kid? Where's my kid going? And we have some information. We have the ability to show you now, based on where you live, where you would be. So a lot of this we discussed in phase 1. We are moving or completing our transition to separate elementary and middle schools. Elementaries will be pre-K to 5, middle schools will be 6 to 8, and as part of that process, we are redrawing our boundary lines, and we know that this plan is going to better prepare students academically and socially. We know that it's going to ensure continuity for dual language and other special programming. We know that it's going to be more equitable, and it's going to allow us to dedicate more resources to the classroom and less resources on things like snow removal and utilities and things that don't necessarily have an impact on student learning. One thing I want to re-emphasize here is that this is to complete the transition. We've already been moving in this direction. So we've already created the STEM middle school. So Kelly, for example, used to be a K to 8. Morgan used to be a K to 8. Ian White used to be a K to 8. A lot of our schools already went through this process over the last 4 years. We're just finalizing that transition so that we have distinct elementary, middle, and high schools. So here is where we're at. Last Friday, we announced that Sullivan was going to be the middle school, and we announced what principals are going to be at what schools for next year. And we announced where the dual language programming is going to be and the process for reassignment of impacted staff. These are the decisions that we hope to make in phase 2. Most notably is really drawing the exact boundaries so that families know where their children will be attending school next year and in 2026 or 2027 when we build a new middle school. We want to make sure that by the end of November, we also let the community know what upgrades we're going to be making to this school and ones that were already done. For example, these windows that you see right now are all brand new. If you notice, if you're from around here, the landscape has been recently done. There's a lot of upgrades that we've already done to this facility, but there's still more that we need to do to make sure that we can welcome all of our middle schoolers that are going to be attending this school next year. We still have to decide where special ed and pre-K programming is going to be and let the community know the process and timing by which any displaced students will be assigned to a specific program. And we owe it to families in late November to also talk about what the appeal process is going to be like and timing for that, and then the exact date when impacted staff will be notified. So this slide right here is really just to let everyone in the community know, everybody here, that we went through an extensive process and outreach to really inform our decision. We had 900 people participate across 31 meetings, and we had 450 people respond to a survey. So there were multiple avenues for input. We had the all stakeholder survey. We had folks that looked at this in real great detail, like our leadership team, our principals, and the rezoning task force. They went through and dived really deep into this process to ultimately sift through over 40 different scenarios and land on the one that we landed on. And then there were other avenues for input, like tonight, where you just show up once and you provide your input, you take a survey, you ask questions. There were many of those meetings. In every single one of these avenues for input, we looked at the survey, for example. We cut up the survey by demographic, whether it's staff, parents, students. We cut it up by race. We cut it up by grade span. And every way we looked at the survey data, Sullivan was the top choice amongst the majority of the people that took the survey. In every single one of the groups that studied this issue over time, so the rezoning task force, the principals, the family engagement team, my leadership team, the teacher advisory group, those that studied this process intensely, their top choice was Sullivan to become a middle school. And then the feedback that we got at a lot of these sessions was, like I said earlier, was very personal. A lot of people were approaching this from a very personal perspective, which is completely understandable, but most of the feedback we got was that Sullivan was the top choice. And the top 3 reasons that we heard why Sullivan was the best choice is, number one, the location. A lot of people liked that it's relatively in the center of Holyoke, that it's close to where the other middle school is going to be. And the facility itself was the second reason. So a lot of people, hopefully some of you had the opportunity to walk through the building today, but a lot of people really like that it has big classrooms, it has new windows, some better lighting, some stuff that came up at the other building, Donahue and Kelly, that we were looking at. They have dividers for walls instead of actual walls, so that could be disruptive from one class to another. So a lot of people like that. Here we actually have walls, not dividers for walls. And then we evaluated each of the scenarios against the guidelines that were established by the rezoning task force, and this was the top-rated choice. So the decision, which we announced last week, is that Sullivan is going to be a middle school, Kelly and Donahue are going to remain elementary schools, and that the dual language at Ian White is going to be a full dual language school, which means there'll be 4 classrooms of dual language programming per grade, and then that Kelly is going to be a partial dual language school, and that this school is going to be where kids that went to dual language in Ian White and Kelly, they'll meet up here, and this is where the dual language programming will continue at Sullivan. So these are the 6 elementary schools: Donahue, Ian White, Kelly, Lawrence, McMahon, and Morgan. And in the future, we hope that we can consolidate to 2 middle schools, one being Sullivan, which we're which is here, and then another one being brand new Peck when we build the Peck Middle School. Until we do that, we're going to have to split up that second middle school into two locations. One of them is going to be Metcalf, and the other one is already an existing middle school. It's co-located with the Holyoke High Dean campus. Half of the middle schoolers will be at STEM, half of them will be at Metcalf. And then hopefully, when we need your help, we need to make sure that our city council members and our elected officials prioritize making sure we get a brand new middle school. Then we'll be able to move those students into a new middle school. This is what the feeder pattern looks like. So you can see that if you are in McMahon, Ian White, or Kelly, your middle school is going to be Sullivan. And if you are at Lawrence, Donahue, or Morgan, your middle school is going to be New Peck in the future and either Holyoke, STEM, or Metcalf next year. So the middle school landscape, you heard me say this already. Right now, we have middle schoolers in McMahon, middle schoolers in Sullivan, middle schoolers at STEM, middle schoolers at Peck and Holyoke Middle School, and middle schoolers here. We hope that in the future we can get this nice brand new building. We need to make sure that the funding comes through for that. We're in the pipeline with the MSBA. And currently, Peck would be torn down if that were to happen. We would be able to tear down Peck, which is why we would be moving kids into Metcalf and STEM so that that building could be demolished and built a brand new building built. We hope that we could have about 550 students or so at that site once the new school's built. And like I said, next year is for the next few years, there's a temporary transition where they'll be co-located both at Dean and then at Metcalf. If the funding isn't approved, so we'll know, I would say, within the next year or so, we'll know whether the city's going to fund a new school or not. We hope. Our school building committee is working really hard to make that happen. If it is not approved, then that would allow us the opportunity to move back into Old Peck. But in all scenarios, eventually we would be closing down the Metcalf school and eventually getting STEM middle school out of Dean, because that's been a growing vocational program. And I know it really has done a turnaround in terms of people didn't want to go to Dean before, but now we have a wait list of families that want to get their kids into Dean, and we can't because there's no space, because we have the STEM middle school there as well. So hopefully we'll be in a position where we can grow Dean, but in order to do that, we need a new school. I did briefly mention this. These are some recent upgrades that we already did to Sullivan. So we did the brand new windows and doors, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. We just did a partial roof replacement. If you notice out front, we redid the landscaping, cut down a lot of trees. And every single classroom right now has air conditioning at Sullivan, which is not the case at Peck. Every summer when we start school, it's really hot, and I get a lot of phone calls from Peck about how hot it is in that building. So we still have some upgrades that are in the works, but part of today, we want to make sure we get feedback from as many people as we can on what other upgrades they're thinking. But we do plan on replacing a lot of the lighting here with newer, modern, brighter LED lights. We want to design an entry vestibule similar to what we have at Holyoke High, where you can enter the building and there's another set of doors that you can't have access to the building without checking into the office. That is something we really want to have in all of our middle schools, so that's something that's being designed right now, and we hope to be complete in the near future. And that basketball court hasn't been touched since I was a kid. I remember I used to play there, and they haven't done anything to it. So one of the ways we're using ESSER money is to design a brand new basketball court. I'm hoping that we can get like a roof over it, so it could be used for more than just basketball. It could be used for outside classroom space, stuff like that. But that's one of the projects that we have going on in the near future. And then again, we're going to be encouraging everyone to take a survey to see what other things we should consider. I've already heard bathrooms. So half of this building has middle school bathrooms already, and half of it has elementary, and we're going to have to bring those toilets up a little higher because we're going to have more older kids in this building. So I want to hand it over to our technical consultants just to introduce themselves and talk about the process and that they played in this role.
Thanks, Anthony. Good evening, everybody. I'd just like to introduce ourselves, AppGeo. This is our team, and we've been working very closely with the Rezoning Task Force these last several months. My name is Priya Sankalya, and I've been a project manager at our company, AppGeo, for a long time now, and done a lot of these school redistricting projects. I must say, it has been, a real pleasure working with the team here. Erin has been fantastic, as also Anthony and everybody on the team. The detailed knowledge of Holyoke and the amount time spent on the process has really been very, very in-depth. So we came to this with all of this experience from other school districts, but it's always insightful learning from a new district. Ashley Tardif, who's here with me, did a lot of the data processing, the data work, setting up workflows to then create these scenarios that we're going to share with you. And another colleague of mine, Russell Cohen, was also part of the project doing similar processing of data, figuring out what the drive times would be. And all of this was done using current student locations. So let me just share a little bit more with you about our company. So we are a mapping company based out of Boston, and we've been doing work. In fact, Holyoke has been our customer, the city of Holyoke, for a long time. We did a lot of mapping for them over the years. And similarly, we've worked with a lot of other local governments, all kinds of GIS mapping work. This is what this is. It's geographic information systems. The work that we've done for you, using GIS is basically a location and then, the data behind it. So that's what GIS is. And so we've been, doing this for a long time, over 30 years. We've been in this business. And in the recent, about 6 or 8 years, we've worked with a lot of school districts, especially in New England, helping them with this redistricting process, which we know is really hard because, it's complex and depends on the geography of a city or a town, and then it also weighs in on the people and where they live and what schools they go to currently. So it is definitely a complex process. This is just to give you a quick overview on how we did this. We first start with gathering data, and that is primarily the student locations, like where are the students currently located. And we have to use current student data because otherwise there's nothing that we can use it's sort of like a proxy. Let's use the current student location data, see where they are, and then, you build your models based on that student location. So you get, we have the student locations, we have the current school districts, we look at a lot of other background information about the town, the demographics, the land use, the property sales, all of that is sort of factored in some way. Is there any development potential? All of that is sort of looked at as reference. And then we set up these workflows to process all the student data. And because Holyoke has a pretty complex sub-separate programming that's happening, so we had to figure out what to do and where to assign all those students. So all of those workflows were set up as a first step. And then what we did is we did component mapping. So what we did is, and you'll see this on the maps, and I expect several of you have already seen some version of these maps. And we essentially break up all the entire city into these components or little building blocks, like a little jigsaw puzzle where you create these blocks, and those blocks are created, using all the knowledge of the rezoning task force and who know the district really well. And then we created those like neighborhoods. They could be larger chunks, could be tinier neighborhoods, and that gives you the flexibility of then creating the zone that you want. So that was the second step. And then what we did was we collaboratively built these maps. And like Anthony said, more than 40 scenarios. And because we had to create scenarios for every potential middle school. So that's why for every potential middle school, we had a whole bunch of plans. And so that, multiplying that, it was a lot of plans that the task force looked at. And then we evaluated those, and a lot of the evaluation was, most of the evaluation was based on those redistricting principles that we had founded right at the beginning. And then, of course, all the different committees looked at them, and a lot of in-depth analysis was done to land on what we've landed on today. And we really try our best to present this in the most clear way possible. And then in the end, again, like Anthony said, the maps that you'll see right now gives you an overview, but then we also have an interactive map that you can actually get into and locate yourself and locate and identify which zone you've been zoned to. So that's really our process, and I think in this phase 2, we'll be doing a little bit more of it, because the input that you give us on where are those boundaries, does this boundary make sense, is there a reason why a certain component should be in another zone? And right now, they're based on a lot of numbers, so looking at the student locations, looking at what is the capacity of a school, what's the and how much can it handle with the current zone that we've created. So there is, some permutations and combinations that we can come up with, and that's what is the second phase, just adjusting those lines. So I'm going to give it back to Anthony. He'll introduce the maps to you, and then also the reasoning. I mean, sort of what are the benefits of these maps, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. So what we've created for feedback for phase 2 is 2 different maps, all with before we were looking at 3 different schools. Now that we've landed on a school, we thought it was important to lay out 2 different maps and get input on that. And I really mean that when I say I want input, and I hope that the decision that we made, I hope that everyone understands. The reason why we landed on the decision that we landed on was because of the feedback that we got. So it's not like your feedback is not being listened to or heard. We heard from so many different people, and in fact, it actually pushed a lot of our thinking, and it, instead of going with the 3 original ones that we had proposed, we took all that feedback, everything we've heard, and created a much stronger 4th option, which is where we landed. So we're real serious about getting input and using that input to help inform our decisions. So this is proposed map number 1. You can see that I don't know if this is purple, but we're going to call it light purple, is the McMahon neighborhood up here. In this checkered box. This is anyone who lives in that checkered box. If they want to participate in dual language programming, they have preference to go to Ian White for dual language preferencing. If they don't want dual language for their children and they want a much more traditional SEI learning, then they're green, so they would be zoned to Donahue School here, and again, the light purple is McMahon. Yellow on this map is Lawrence Elementary. Morgan is this brownish peachy color, and then the darker purple is the Kelly School map there. And then on the right-hand side, you have the middle school zones, which are part of the proposed map 1. So all of this blue, down in the flats, all the way up here and over, would be the Sullivan Middle School. And then anywhere in this brown area and to the left would be the Peck Middle School. Then we have a second proposal, which is map 2, which basically it changes a little bit. We do bump these up side by side, so I'm not going to go through all of the colors. I will say there's only like 3 students that live in this area up here. So we were able to say, like, okay, that, you know, it didn't make a huge impact to have those students going to Ian White if they wanted to. It was only 3. But you can see here, I think we got a map that has the elementary comparison. So one of the things we want to do is get feedback today, right? So I can just tell you one thing, this is just an example of how I looked at this map. One thing that I like about this map on this side here, you see this little slice right here that's brown? Over here it's purple. So that line in between those 2 little neighborhoods is Cabot Street. And what I liked about this is that kids won't have to cross Cabot Street to go to Kelly, and Morgan's actually closer to that. So that's just an example of some of the feedback we're looking for from all of you. Something that I noticed was that, oh wow, those kids can go to Morgan. They don't need to cross Cabot Street and go to Kelly. That's a cool feature that's a cool part of map 2 that I didn't know prior to looking at this a little deeper. So the next slide just shows the differences in the middle school map between 2. So you can see here, I think the biggest change here is this slice right here ends up going to Sullivan, whereas in map 1, it goes to Peck. So we're going to get an opportunity here to break out into groups, and I have someone at every table that has access to an interactive map. For those that have like really specific questions, we'll be able to, you know, type in your address and go through that process. But first, I just wanted to lay out some of the pros and cons, and I don't want to, it's tough to use the words pros and cons, but I want to just point out like some of the differences between map 1 and 2. In map 1, it keeps Lawrence and Kelly Elementary communities most intact. They'll be getting some new students, but they don't lose any students in map 1. So Kelly and Lawrence would pretty much be not impacted by map 1 versus in map 2, that's not necessarily the case. There's a little change for Kelly and more Lawrence families. Map 1 has the least amount of elementary walkers, and enrollment at Peck is higher than Sullivan, which is a good thing because when we get a new middle school, more of our students would benefit from the advantages of having a brand new state-of-the-art middle school. In map 1, Kelly has lower enrollment, which would be better if we wanted to consider going down to a 3 homeroom per grade versus a 4 homeroom per grade. So one of the things that, you know, is clear when we look at this data, our enrollment has been declining. We've lost almost 500 students in the last 6 years, and I think that's a trend across the state. Enrollment is down across the state, but we're actually seeing that right now. So I know initially we'd love to have 4 classrooms for every grade, but our enrollment just doesn't support that at every school. The percentage of students of different races is the most similar across both of the middle schools in the scenario of map 1. And the split of economically disadvantaged students is also even across both middle schools in MAP 1. Now in MAP 2, the section east of, this is the one I was just talking about, that split between those two neighborhoods on Cabot Street. Kids would be able to walk to Morgan without having to cross Cabot Street, which is just a busy street in general because you get a lot of people traveling from Chicopee and going up Cabot, trying to get on 91. On MAP 2, the non-dual language students near Ian White go to McMahon or Kelly, which ultimately feeds into the same middle school zone as the Ian White zone, and that's not the case in MAP 1. In MAP 1, there's one small piece of, or one small slice, a piece of the puzzle that would go to a different school than those in the Ian White neighborhood. MAP 2 keeps the Sullivan Elementary families all together going to McMahon rather than splitting it across McMahon and Donahue. That's another nice feature of MAP 2 is that there was one section, the one that I pointed out, that was purple in one and brown in another. Those kids are currently zoned for Sullivan, and they would be going to a different middle school. In MAP 2, or a different elementary school in MAP 2, all Sullivan Elementary families would travel together to McMahon. The other thing about MAP 2 is that it keeps the non-dual language families from Ian White together, going to McMahon or Kelly, whereas MAP 1 has them spread out across 3 schools. And then the last thing we noticed about this is that it has more enrollment at Kelly, which is better if we want a 4 homeroom per grade school. So just to visualize that again, you could see here, more kids going to Kelly, so they would actually get more, 4 homerooms per grade. So there's better collaboration and teaming, grade level teaming there in that scenario for Kelly. So in summary, the most important factors like enrollment, capacity, demographics, impacted students, students eligible for transportation, they're all very close in both of the maps that we have here. It really comes down to choice, and like during the phase 1, we heard a lot of good feedback from families that we didn't know or consider going into it. The most significant unknown risk factor, I just talked about it, is how our enrollment just fluctuates every year. So, and we've been on a downward trend with our enrollment, similar to the state. Across the entire state, it's been on a downward trend. Either plan assumes across the system about 20 homerooms per grade in grades K to 5, which could be compromised with our declining enrollment, and then 16 per grade in grades 6 to 8. And the last piece here is we may need to introduce buffer zones. So what a buffer zone is if you live in this block or this piece of the puzzle, you would either go to one school or go to another school, because we want to make sure that there's flexibility to keep the demographics balanced. We don't want one school super over-enrolled and then another school that doesn't have enough students to run a school, so that we may have to introduce buffer zones. We're looking to see if there's a way to do this at least for next year without doing the buffer zones, and then seeing what we learn, and then later on introducing them if we have to, but that's something that we are currently working on. So, I want to, like I said, there's going to be people at each table with a laptop. Can you guys raise your hand? Everybody with their hand raised has a laptop and has the interactive map, and they'll be able to do that with you. So we're going to do that in a little bit, but I am going to ask, there's a survey at each of your tables that you can handwrite, or you could also visit right on your phone, www.hps.holyoke.ma.us/redesign. Did you get that? There's a red button at the top where the survey is a little longer, but if you want to skip the question, you can skip the question. But if you do choose to fill out the handwritten one, we are going to also get that information into the survey. We're going to have people work on getting it in there so that we can aggregate all that information and make informed decisions. So, I want to make sure we create time for questions. So, one thing that I didn't do well the first time is I want to make sure that those that speak Spanish and want to ask a question, if you don't feel comfortable speaking, even if you're not a Spanish speaker and you just don't feel comfortable in large crowd speaking, you can write down your questions and hand it to anyone over there, and we'll ask the question for you, and we have translators that can interpret. But if you just want to ask your questions, we can also do that as well. So I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity, even if you're shy, to get your questions heard. So, what questions do we have? End of November is what we're shooting for. So the last week of November, that could spill into, I believe the last week of November, that Friday is December 2nd. So I'm thinking no later than December 2nd, we're going to be making a decision and communicating that out to everybody in the HPS community. So if you're a parent, you'll probably get a robocall. You'll probably get you'll see it on social media, all the different avenues that we use to communicate. That's an important announcement, so we'll make it then. Any other questions? Do we want to just take 10 minutes to write down your feedback, process all of this technical information that we're giving, and also just go to one of the tables with somebody?
Sorry, I do have a quick question. Are we also going to hear how many students are anticipated in different buildings before making votes? And is that, I know you don't have exact numbers, but roughly this number of students in here, roughly this number of students?
Yeah, it's gonna, these decisions, which map we go with is gonna change what the enrollment looks like. So that we'll definitely take that into consideration. But I will say that we have one of the most transient populations in Holyoke. We can only tell you, based on where kids live right now, what the enrollment is roughly gonna be. But we know that there's many changes to that every single year. So thank you for your question. You want to give her the mic?
I'm sorry. Yeah, sure. Under the current system, if a family starts at a school and they move within Holyoke, usually they can keep their kid in that school. Still be the same in the new system? Or a goal?
The family can file for a zone appeal. Okay. Even currently, if you move
within
Holyoke to another school, you don't automatically stay at that school. You have to go through the
process.
Zone appeal process.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'm just gonna take 5 minutes for anybody that wants to finish writing their questions or anything, and then we'll collect them and read them out. But if you could just take this time to fill out the questionnaire either at on your desk, hard copy, or go on our website and fill out the electronic survey, I'd greatly appreciate it. So we'll take 5 minutes. If when I come back to this mic you need a little bit more time, feel free to let me know, and we can extend that 5 minutes a little longer. All right, I have a couple written questions here. Will middle schools enforce uniforms? Sorry, let me. That is so. My thoughts on uniforms is that I really want to leave it up to the people in the communities on whether or not that's something they want for their school. So I think one of the things that we're thinking about doing is surveying families. Once all the schools are set, surveying families on whether or not they want uniforms. And those survey results are going to ultimately, that and what the building leaders' core values are and what they want. Those two things are going to weigh in heavily to what decision we make. I can tell you, I've heard mixed. I've heard, some school committee members, some family members say that they want uniforms and they think it's a good thing, and then I've heard from students, especially, that they don't want uniforms. They want to just wear their own clothes. So it's really mixed, and I think, I'm a person about getting feedback from the people that live in those communities. So I think that if we were going to make any changes like that, I would want to hear from the families and the staff of that school community. I got another question. Will there be more students in each class? The answer to that is no. We are not considering increasing our class sizes as a result of this. As I mentioned, I do think that we have relatively small class sizes. I was looking at it. Our maximum ratio for class sizes is about 23 in the elementary grades, and I would say we probably average around 17 kids. So we don't plan on changing that. We wouldn't go above, I don't plan on changing the ratios of class sizes. Are the middle school teachers that are already here going to stay? That is going to be something that we're going to have decisions on by the middle of December. So the staff reassignment process is something that we want to have complete by the end of December. We do have, for those of you that are staff and want more information or want to listen more or hear more or have more questions, Beth Gage emailed all staff last Friday and proposed 2 options for feedback on November 8th, just to meet with staff. If you're a staff member and you want to meet with Human Resources, there's going to be 2 options to do that on November 8th. Just go to the email that Beth Gage sent out on Friday. And that takes care of that. I have another written one, but I saw a hand raised. Mickey?
Yeah, there's a good question here cited about the demographics of map 1 versus map 2. Cited that in the presentation there were some comments about map 1's demographics being quite balanced, and just wondering if map 2 is substantially different or...
None of the differences were substantial. None of them were substantial. And especially in middle school. So part of the process around phase 1, we heard from a lot of elementary families that they want their neighborhood school to stay elementary and that they're okay with their middle schoolers getting on a bus if the school's a little further away. So because families preference that neighborhood school in the elementary grades, and it's important for families too, for access to the school and all of that, it's going to be harder to do that, especially with race. We look at a lot of demographics. We look at students on IEPs, we look at English language learners, we look at economically disadvantaged, we look at race. It's harder to completely balance that and make it all equal in the elementary schools. But in both of these maps, we were able to accomplish some really, really good balance in the middle school grades.
It's sort of a staffing question, but Since Sullivan is being made the home of the dual language, like what expertise in dual language middle school will be brought to Sullivan to help with that type of education?
That's a good question, and, you know, we do have middle school teachers right now at Metcalf that have extensive dual language training, so, like, you know, there's probably going to be a lot of movement from dual language Metcalf, for example. They would likely be going to Sullivan, but yes, for elementary. But she's not going to be taking her 7th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers. Yeah. So here's a couple questions that I have written down. Will you be able to upgrade at least the main areas of this school in time for 2023? So we hope that we can do the vestibule, which is the main entrance of this school. I really hope that we can do that basketball court and that we can do the bathrooms and maybe do something in the courtyard. But fill out the survey. Like, we want to hear from you what improvements you'd like to see at this school if you have children that are going to be coming to this school for middle school. Do you have enough buses to pick up all elementary students living in Bolden and Jarvis community? Yes, we do. So we looked at, we have about 5,000 students, and this change is roughly, you know, depending on what map we choose, means that 120 more students are going to be eligible for transportation, which is probably about 2 or 3 buses. So one thing I'd like to do, and it might not be as clear cut, is elementary start a little earlier, and then middle and high school are on the later tier. The way we use our buses is we get the buses for 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and that's what constitutes the daily rate. So our buses are able to go to pick up students, bring them to an earlier tier school, and then go pick up more students and bring them to a later tier school. So while I would like to have all elementary schools starting at the same time and secondary schools starting at a later time, I know that I may have to find some trade-offs, because we also want to be fiscally responsible and spend as much resources in the classroom as possible. So it may mean that one of our elementary schools or one of our middle schools has to go against that change, so that we can try to maintain the same number of buses that we have on the road right now. We're really trying to get that new middle school, so any way that we can contribute to saving money for the city, we want to make sure we do that. And that's the last of the written questions.
It's here that under education, K impacted families, all elementary school families will move to Ian White unless in earlier grades and now zoned for Kelly could have an option to go to Kelly. So does that mean that Metcalf Elementary School kids who are in the Kelly zone will have an option to attend dual language at Kelly or at Ian White?
So, no. I need to read but let me just tell you what I understand from this. So right now, we have 2 classrooms per grade that's open to the entire city. That's the dual language programming at Metcalf right now, is 2 classes per grade open to the entire city. We don't plan on changing that. So Ian White would maintain 2 classrooms per grade open to the entire city, and then the other 2 dual language classrooms per grade, they would get that zone preference that you saw, that checkered box. They would have an opportunity they would have an opportunity to stay at Ian White if they're in dual language, and that would make up the 4 classrooms. Those that live in the Kelly neighborhood, because it's a partial dual language school, they have the option to go to dual language at Kelly or go to regular education at Kelly. So the families in the Kelly neighborhood, in the Flats neighborhood, have the choice to send their kid to Kelly for dual language or not dual language.
Okay, so they won't have the option to go to Ian White.
I think though, if they want to, they can enter the lottery just like everybody else in the city for those 2 slots. But I don't know that they automatically get a choice. They don't automatically get a choice to go to Ian White.
If they're currently at Metcalf but zoned for Kelly, then they could choose.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. She understood your question way better than I did. Great. So, another question?
Sorry.
That's okay.
But one of my questions is, what are the start times going to be if families are split from doing Ian White to either the McMahon or Donahue option? Will those schools be starting at the same time that Ian White starts? Has that been looked at?
Well, I think one of my leading hypotheses is that I'd like all elementary schools to start earlier. So the first tier, which is I believe 740. We haven't made final decisions on that.
Right. It
And
just
then,
makes it hard for single parent households
Yeah.
if they have kids split between 2 different schools when
Yep.
previously they had not.
Yep.
And then my other question is, I'm just curious, how much money are we spending banking on an if for a new middle school on this whole process?
How much
that's
money
that's
are
a
we
big
spending?
if. By rezoning and doing all of this with transportation and
I mean-
whatnot, it's a big if. I mean, the election a few years ago with vote yes for all these grants didn't go the way we wanted.
Yeah.
So this is a big if, and I feel like there's a lot of resources being put into this big if.
I don't know what resources you're referring to, but I can tell you that this is actually consolidating our portfolio and saving money for the city. So we right now we have too many small schools spread across the city, and in this scenario we closed 2 of our schools.
Right.
So it's actually saving money, not spending more money.
I think Jackie's going to clarify for me.
Okay.
I think she is questioning if this,
I don't
if this
think
is
she
based
needs it.
on the new school, and
This
the
is
answer
not.
is not. We're gonna go K-5, 6, 8 with or without a new school, and that is gonna save us money.
Yes.
But the part B is, how much is it costing us to go through the process?
It's costing us a lot of time, but I don't see this costing us any more money other than getting technical consultants to help us make sure we're making informed decisions.
You want to say it instead? Well, so the good question is, in terms of the money we're spending on this process, right now we're spending temporary money. So when the federal government gave everybody a whole bunch of money, you don't want to build that into staffing and things that you count on, but it's a really good time to do some exploration, work with consultants like AppGeo to really help us analyze this deeply, because that's a very good use of temporary money. It's not going to affect our ability to do things into the future. Yeah, the middle school is not dependent.
If we don't get money for a new middle school, what that means, unfortunately, is that we end up moving our middle schoolers from Metcalf and STEM into an older building. And I will say, if that were to happen, I'm going to be pushing the city really, really, really hard to bring that school up to code. It needs new windows, it needs a new electrical grid. Right now, I can't even put a new AC. An AC is not expensive, but you put an AC, you're likely gonna blow the building, not blow the building up, but I was repeating what I said. Blow the what do you call that? The fuse box. There you go. And like I said, it's hard to run summer programming at Peck too because of how hot it gets in the summer. Anyone who questions whether or not Peck is a good facility, I encourage you to take a look at the video that we have online. You could walk through there and see. I went to Peck, and Peck is near and dear to my heart, but I don't know who designed that building. They didn't really think through. There's a lot of interior classrooms with no windows. It just doesn't, it's not a good facility. Another question here.
Another one about the new building. Where are we at in the process? And is there anything we can do to, like, should we be reaching out to our counselors? Is there anything we can do?
Absolutely. Reaching out to your counselors is always a good thing because some counselors certainly hear from a lot of families and I would say a lot of families that, are voters and don't have children in the system are really vocal about why they don't think we should get a new middle school. The challenge is on the mayor to figure out how could we do this without having to go out and do a debt exclusion and raise taxes. Like right now we're going through a design phase. So we're looking at 3 different designs for the model school program. So the MSBA has a model school program where you don't go out and just design a new school. You pick from existing designs that already are cost effective and already have schools built. We're exploring that, but the Peck site itself is built on a huge slope. I'm thinking that it may or may not work, but right now our building committee, Raina sits on it, they're looking at if the model school design would work at the Peck site and would it meet our educational priorities. And if it could and it does save the city money, that's an option we'll go with. If it doesn't, then our previous designer would be able to update the design that they already did. The city's already approved funding for the feasibility study, so we have that locked in. Once we finish with the design, part of the feasibility study is the budget. So it says, here's this beautiful building and here's how much it's going to cost. At that point is when we got to go to the city council and say, look, this is how much it's going to cost, and we need them to vote to approve a new middle school. And we hope to do that. So there's an option right now. We could do that towards the end of the school year, or we could do that in like September, November. It all depends on how ready our city finance team is able to like model out like debt falling off and all the existing budget requests and things like that. When they're ready to do that, then we'll go to the council and say like, hey, we need funding for it. And right now it's part of the MSBA program, so there's definitely like a significant amount of reimbursement. I know that a lot of the people that voted no were being told that, hey, the MSBA is supposed to be refunding 80% of this project, 80%, and they focused on that number, which is completely out of our control. Instead, like, the effective reimbursement rate ended up being like, I want to say 62 or something like that, which is still a lot of money. I think it was like $80 million at the time that the state was giving us to help fund this project, but it didn't go through. So I'm thinking late summer, early fall is when we probably will be going to the city asking them to fund the project. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Neighborhood currently. With map 1, I do see that they will go to Donahue. Ian White students, does that include SIP students as well?
What are you reading? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm looking at, well,
Okay.
Right, and then also though, in map 2, it's not clear whether they'll be going to McMahon or Kelly, and does having a SIP, being in a SIP program determine whether they go to McMahon versus Kelly?
If they're in dual language and they're in
No,
that
no.
checkered box, they would have the option to go. If they don't select, if they're not dual language kids, then they would, if it's purple, they're going, but actually, you're talking about a SIP student?
kid, yeah, so English only.
Special ed programming is part of phase 2. We're still working through all of those details. This is our chief of pupil services.
Hello.
We're working through those details, and we hope to finalize that so that it's part of our announcement in late November.
So currently, any SIP student who is not in dual language but yet still in the Ian White school zone right now, it's undetermined which school they will go to next year. That's how I understand it, at this point in time.
At this point in time, yes, but by the end of November, we'll have an answer.
Okay, but kids, until you decide the map, you said? Correct. Right. Right, but I'm understanding too that map 2, there's a choice, whether, or not a choice, but it says between Kelly or, where is it? McMahon. So will that be determined at that point for SIP students as well, whether it's Kelly or McMahon, or is that information known at this time based on SIP?
Mickey, you gotta,
Right, but you
we
said
gotta
it based on
speak.
map 2,
She's
which I would
trying
be
to
in
translate, so if you're gonna speak, please
that I would go to
ask for a
either,
mic. I heard the.
'cause
My mom used to do that.
Ian White's broken up in map 2.
She
into
that's
two
like
different-
yelling at you, but not yelling at you. Like,
Right, and Jackie had looked at the map.
she used to make me smell the belt too. Huelela, huelela. And I would smell it, and then she put it on the doorknob so I could see it. It worked. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much. I'm going to be here for a little while too, so if you have individual questions, we have a bunch of people around the room that can help answer any individual questions you have. But thank you so much for your time, and please fill out the survey, whether on paper or online.